Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I must say I'm concerned that HHS didn't report. I mean, under FISMA, it's pretty clear when you look at the definition that a report would have been required. Any incident likely to result in a demonstrable harm to the national security interests, foreign relations, or economy, or a breach involving personal identifiable information. So maybe we need to tighten up that FISMA requirement. Because the CISA requirement and the OMB requirement is far more specific. And, you know, I appreciate the fact that Commerce did report to Congress. Thank you. And I'm concerned that HHS did not. And Ms. Vogel, I understand that, you know, you all looked at you know, what the impact was on HHS, but to me, this was definitely a major incident. And certainly it was in terms of the relationship between the different agencies. So I would agree with what the chairman at least implied in his questioning, which is that at least, you know, give us the opportunity to get notified of these so that we can do our proper oversight and be sure that, you know, we're putting together legislation that makes sense to respond to these attacks. With regard to Colonial Pipeline, I know today's focus is about federal cybersecurity attacks, but this Colonial Pipeline one, as I said earlier, probably the biggest attack ever on American infrastructure, certainly the biggest one that we know of. Colonial supplies almost half of the oil to the East Coast. The systems remain offline today as we talk. They've made some progress, understanding, opening up some lines, but not all the way to the East Coast. My hope is by the end of this week, you know, that will be improved. But this is a stark example of how these cyber attacks can have real demonstrable impacts on our economy and our national security. Ask the people who are in East Coast states about what they're paying for gasoline today at the pump, and they will tell you it has impact. There are a variety of tools and guidance to combat ransomware at CISA, Mr. Wales, but as we've seen here, you know, we are not effectively combating ransomware. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Did Colonial contact you?
They did not contact CISA directly.
So they did not contact CISA. Did CISA contact Colonial?
We were brought in by the FBI after they were notified about the incident.
Okay. Would it have been helpful to you if Colonial had contacted you immediately to provide information so you could respond more effectively?
So we received information fairly quickly in concert with the FBI. I think right now we are waiting for additional technical information on exactly what happened at Colonial so that we can use that information to potentially protect other potential victims down the road.
So you still don't have the technical information you need to be able to be responsive and to provide support to critical infrastructure. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, but that is not surprising given that it's, you know, they've only been working on the incident response since over the weekend, and it's fairly early. We have had historically good relationship with both Colonial as well as the cybersecurity firms that are working on their behalf. We do expect information to come from that, and when we have it, we will use it to help improve cybersecurity more broadly.
If the FBI had not brought you in, would Colonial, do you think, have contacted you to ask for your assistance?
No.
Do you think that's a problem?
I think that there is benefit when CISA is brought in quickly because the information that we glean, we work to share it in a broader fashion to protect other critical infrastructure.
Right. I think that's the point, is that, one, you could have helped Colonial, but two, you know, having that technical information enables you to help other critical infrastructure. And if there's ransomware focused on Colonial, there's likely to be ransomware focused on other critical infrastructure as well. Isn't that true?
That is true.
Well, we appreciate your testimony today about the need for more funding, for preparedness funding, for CISA funding, the need to transform some of our systems and the cost of that. But it seems to me we also have to worry about these attacks, whether they're direct cyber attacks in the federal government or whether they are attacks in the private sector, whether they are ransomware attacks, being communicated to CISA in that, you know, you've got the expertise. We've passed a lot of funding already and a lot of bipartisan legislation to help you all have the tools that you need. Seems to me we've got to be sure that communication flow is happening. By the way, just a general question, and you know, I look forward to a second round. We can get into more of this, but my sense is that we have a number of vulnerabilities at the federal level. One is the systems themselves. In other words, the software, in particular, some of the hardware is not updated. Is that accurate?
there are legacy systems in the federal government that require modernization, absolutely.
And is that where you would focus most of the funding immediately? What would be your top target? Because also, we have a lot of discussion on this committee about personnel and ensuring we have, the best and the brightest with the federal government to be able to protect our personal information and national security. We also know that, there is concern about practices. In other words, even with the best personnel and with the best infrastructure, software and hardware, if you aren't following the right practices, the so-called cyber hygiene to be able to protect your systems, to be able to provide the appropriate encryption and so on, that it's difficult to defend against these attacks. How would you prioritize those, and where would you prioritize the funding?
Yeah, I don't think you can prioritize among those three. Those are areas that, as you're deploying new technology, those all need to advance in parallel. You need to ensure that as you put in place new systems, you've got the people that are actually capable of utilizing them to improve your security. You need to have people who have the ability to configure them in the right way. We see this a lot, particularly with the move to the cloud, in particular at the state and local level. They'll deploy on the cloud, but they'll misconfigure their cloud environment and make it open and accessible to potential malicious actors. And so you want to ensure that your technology, your people, and your processes are being modernized together, because if any one of those lags behind, you're going to introduce weaknesses into your overall information security program.
Well, that's the idea in having CISA have more responsibility and more funding and the expertise, and so we need to continue to work on that. But again, we've done a lot to provide the tools, and now the question is, how do you bring those three elements and others together? And we got to do it yesterday, because these attacks continue.
But sir, I would also add that it's not just CISA, because ultimately the agencies are the ones that are deploying technology on their environment to support the operational needs of their mission. And as they do so, they need to do it with security in mind. They need to build that kind of security and resilience in. They need to build in those kind of zero trust principles to ensure that their systems are protected. And they need to ensure that they have the right people and processes in place. We can assist them. We provide best practices. In some cases, we provide technology. But overall, managing that information security program at an agency is essential. And I think that's why we need to ensure that the CISOs, like those joining me today, are kind of empowered and resourced to be able to support the needs and the security of their agency.
Empowered and resourced and held accountable for what happens at those agencies, including the reporting we talked about earlier, correct?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator